seconds. Okay, let's start this meeting. Call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, will the city clerk please take attendance for the city council?
There are 5 city council members present. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Wendell will be here shortly, and all county commissioners are present.
Thank you. Entertain a motion from the city council to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Larry?
I would also ask the commission or motion from the county commission to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. All right. Any comments from the public? Comments from council or county commission? Will the city clerk please call the roll for the council?
Avery?
Aye.
Doran?
Aye.
Niemeyer?
Aye.
Hager? Specker?
Aye.
Tilton Burn?
Aye.
Will the county clerk please call the roll for the commission?
Miller.
Aye.
Post.
Aye.
Vanderwall.
Aye.
Hostler.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Item 4A, public hearing and action on City of Brookings Ordinance 25-013 and Brookings County Commission Ordinance 25-004. An ordinance to change the zoning within the City of Brookings. The east 1 acre of Rudabush addition, easterly 2 acres of Lot 1, and northeast quarter of Section 4 T109 North, R50W, as also known as 1809 West 20th Street South, from Joint Jurisdiction Agricultural District to Joint Jurisdiction Residence R1A Single Family District. I should say City of Brookings County. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Entertain a motion from the City Council to approve Ordinance 25-013.
So moved.
Second.
Larry?
Entertain a motion from the county to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second.
Open the public hearing on this item. Is there any public comment? Or no, we'll have Mike give us a presentation first. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor, council members, county commission members. The ordinance before you tonight is a request to rezone property located within the joint jurisdiction area just on West 20th Street South. The request is to rezone 1 acre from Ag to a residence R1A, which is a single family district. This 1 acre parcel is located within the floodplain, and if approved, the applicant would be required to follow the floodplain development standards as far as elevating the property out of the floodplain, as well as providing compensatory storage. The future land use map in this area identifies this area as an open space, and that's primarily related to the floodplain that is in this location. As mentioned, this is the east half of a 2 acre platted lot that previously had an existing house on the property, but that was removed some time ago. It does have an existing access drive, which would be utilized if approved as well. The development review team met with the applicant, reviewed the request. They did not support the rezoning request, more from a policy perspective of rezoning isolated small ag tracts. The City Planning Commission voted 5-3, recommended denial of the rezone. With that, I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. Kind of jumped ahead on the motions there. Open the public hearing on this item. Is there any public comment?
Good evening, County Commissioners, City Council members, Mr. Mayor. Thomas Chandler, 410 20th Avenue. I hope you've all had a chance to review the information I gave you. I stand for any questions or concerns you might have.
Okay. Council have any questions for TJ? County Commissioners?
I have a question for Mike or TJ. You had said that they're looking to rezone that there was a house on there previously. After that house was taken away, did it get rezoned again? Or is it the same zoning that it was when that house was there?
The zoning hasn't changed. It was previously zoned ag. I believe in the county, there's provisions on some of these smaller lots that they have building eligibilities. But if the structure is removed, there's a certain time period that they would have to reestablish that use. That time period has since surpassed, and so the building eligibility no longer exists on that small tract.
What is that time period?
Typically, from the city's perspective, a non-conforming use, it's 1 year from if the use is discontinued for a period of 1 year. I'm not sure on the county side if there's specific provisions as far as with their building eligibilities, how long those are maintained. But from the city side, we have a 1 year time frame on non-conforming uses.
I'm struggling to try to understand that because I recently built on a home, on an acreage that had a home and hadn't had a home since the 90s and was able to receive a building permit and build there. So has that changed? I don't understand why they could build there or could live there before, but now all of a sudden can't. That's
Sometimes these properties are developed prior to zoning being in place, or they were platted prior to zoning being in place. At this particular time, because it's a rezoning request, it doesn't follow the city's regulations. If the zoning is approved, then they would have to follow all the city's regulations. Our regulations have a 1 year time frame that's associated with a non-conforming use. The county has some different regulations on egg-zoned properties as far as maintaining building eligibilities. I don't know all of those exact details. You'd maybe have to ask county staff if they have those specific criteria.
okay. Interesting. Thank you, Mike.
Councilmember Duren?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few questions. So, Mike, with the eligibility, is there any like awareness provided to the property owner that they only have a year to rebuild, or is it just like was it found out after the fact? Or I'm just wondering about that.
So the city's not involved in any part of this process because it's zoned ag. It's administered by the county. The only reason we're involved at this particular point in time is they're trying to change it from ag status to a resident status, and by doing so, then it would come under the administration of the city. I can't speak to the county's building eligibilities of what qualifies, what doesn't, and any sort of notification process that they have with that.
Okay, thank you. And then I had another question around the factor of the fire department would be required to grant an exception to the code requiring hydrants during the permitting phase if this was passed. Is that typical, or what would emergency response to that land look like with that exception?
So emergency response would be like any emergency response in the rural area. The trucks would be dispatched. They would utilize the trucks. They have tanker trucks that if it's a significant enough event that they would use the tanker trucks to replenish the apparatuses that are on site, and they would just continue to roll and replenish, refill.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions right now.
Larry?
I was wondering if I was able to question our Community Development Director, Mr. Hill,
Yeah.
on this matter. Bob, could you answer the question on the eligibility for building after there has been a building there?
If I'm not mistaken, on this particular lot, we allow one residence on a non-conforming lot. And once the new residence was built, the old residence was removed, and that took the eligibility for it. And then at a later time, they came in and subdivided the land. Anytime you subdivide such as 2 acres into 1 acre, you lose that building eligibility. It has to be platted by 1975 when we started zoning for the building quote-unquote eligibilities to stand. So we allow 1 residence per lot as of now, newly platted lots.
So the residence to the west was the established building site, and then the,
As far as I can determine, yes.
thank you.
Councilmember Specker.
Yeah, Bob, so when was it platted, the lot to the east?
I don't have that information with me, ma'am.
But it would have been after 75 then?
The one to the east, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
In my, like I say, I don't have the plating records in front of me, but
Again?
I have another question, but I think this might be for Mike. For the flood zone, because the city requires that you build 2 feet above the floodplain and then replace that volume that you're displacing by digging it out somewhere. Do you know how high the floodplain is in this area?
I do not. They would need to hire a civil engineer to determine what the base flood elevation is out in this area. And it's not uncommon when you get into these kind of rural areas or even on kind of the outskirts of the city of Brookings. Some of those base flood elevations haven't been determined yet. They would need to go through a surveying process, determine that where the base flood elevation is, and then to adhere to the floodplain development standards, they have to be 2 feet above. And then they would have any fill material that they would put on the site to reach that 2 feet above base flood elevation would then also need to be reduced to allow for compensatory storage on the lot as well. And so it's part of the process that the applicant, if approved, would have to go through that process. He's indicated that he would follow that process, hire the appropriate civil engineering professionals to complete that portion of it, go through the process of applying for a floodplain development permit through FEMA. Once approved, then they can proceed.
So I have 2 more questions. One of them is 1 acre, do you see that as a reasonable size to be able to adjust or counterbalance that floodplain?
I think so, because really what you're concerned with is just making sure that the structure is elevated 2 feet above. Doesn't mean the yard or the surrounding area will be, but just where the structure is, and it's really where the habitable structures. I think where the applicant is looking at in this particular situation is, you know, his preference is just a single-story kind of slab-on-grade type home with footings and obviously a footing and a foundation, but single story, really no steps. So you're just looking at that footprint that would really be built up, and the rest of the land around there could remain as is, or even provide compensatory storage on the appropriate areas on the lot that would ensure the adherence to the ordinance. So it's not like they're building up the whole site, just primarily where the footprint of the structure would be, and then just slope it appropriately away from the structure.
I thought that the ordinance, you had to have the compensatory storage on the same site.
Yeah, they can do it on the 1 acre site.
Okay.
There's some areas, you know, they would look at, you'd really need to get the engineering involved first to figure out exactly where it would make the most sense to provide that compensatory storage. But there's some opportunities on the site that they could probably adhere to that.
Okay. Would this require DRT approval?
No,
Okay.
no, DRT is just really, it's staff that reviews the requests. They discuss it internally to, you know, adherence to our existing regulations, but it's just a recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Duren.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, since there doesn't seem to be a ton of discussion mentioned in the minutes of the Joint Planning Commission, would you be able to provide any discussion that the DRT did to get to the recommendation of denial?
DRT, you know, we looked at the future land use, obviously, it's predominantly open space, wetland to the west of what is West 16th. That's kind of the existing western city limits boundary, primarily due to a lot of floodplain on the western portion of the community. I think where DRT landed at the recommendation they did is, we kind of acknowledge that it's going to be really challenging to serve them with utilities in this area. There's some existing locations further east that are challenged to serve without appropriate lift stations. We didn't really anticipate that municipal services would be out into this area. I think where the bigger issue came from is looking at it and looking at our policies and whether we support or oppose a particular issue is, are we being consistent with the rules and regulations that we have in place for guidance? And the concern was, yes, this is a small, isolated ag tract that has been platted, but how many of these are located elsewhere around the joint jurisdiction area? And what challenges could they pose if we were to proceed down the path of allowing rezones to occur on these? Does it pose issues for when the city develops into these areas and trying to grow through, around, over, under these areas? How do we make sure that occurs in an orderly fashion? And I think it was more from a policy perspective is where DRT came up with the recommendation. It wasn't necessarily specific to this site, but looking at it just from a general overview, making sure that we're being consistent in how we apply the rules and regulations.
Mike, where was the former existing house on this parcel?
I do not know, Commissioner Jensen.
Is it be within this yellow square here?
I don't know. Honestly, the request for the rezone comes in through the counties, and then we write a staff report kind of from the city's perspective, okay. But we don't have access to a lot of those historical records as far as where the house was located, if there's any permits or anything associated. So my apologies for not having that information available.
Yeah. Bob, could you add to that?
No, I cannot.
Okay.
Mike, hypothetical, do you foresee the city ever expanding west of 16th?
I
mean, first of all,
I'm comfortable saying
does the
probably-
comprehensive plan stop at this, on 16th?
No, the comprehensive plan extends all the way over to the river, the Big Sioux River.
Okay.
But it's all identified as open space, wetlands.
Right. Okay.
Primarily to kind of protect those low-lying areas in their kind of natural agricultural state.
Right.
I don't anticipate the city limits extending past West 16th. It will require, those areas are pretty low. It requires a significant amount of fill to really make it economically feasible to develop in quote unquote a higher density. I think if you were to look at those areas, it's probably something similar to these acreages where they can build up the footprint of the structure. It's just a challenge to serve appropriately with utilities without significantly raising the elevations of the land in those areas.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion, questions?
Mike, one follow, I don't know if it's a question for you or for Mr. Chandler, but I understood there was a house on each plate. There's two driveways here, right? At one time, was there a home on each?
I'm not able to answer that, Commissioner Miller. I don't know.
Mr. Chandler?
No, there was, the only home was on of the 2 acres that are shown, it's split with the yellow square is one and the one to the west is one. The home that was there, or residence that was there, was on the west side.
Okay,
And there was not one on the east side.
thank you.
So on the overhead where the yellow box is, the home would have been to the west of there.
Which there is still a home there, correct?
No, I believe I think it's, could be wrong, but I feel like it's a garage or storage shed that might be there now. There is no residential structure there.
Any other questions, discussion? Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just share some of my thoughts that I've collected from the testimony that you've provided as the property owner as well as through staff. As a city council, I really look at the future land use map and the 2040 comprehensive plan as the city's guiding documents, and reflecting upon the recommendations provided by DRT as well as the Joint Planning Commission. I do see some conflicts that this rezoning could create around planning consistency and equity around future development in the floodplains. I do see this as potentially a valid concern of setting a precedence of piecemealing development. And so I was looking at kind of what could be the impacts of this, not necessarily this specific project, just like Mike was talking about from a policy level. City Council has demonstrated a pretty conservative, regulated, safety-oriented stance around floodplain development, and I recognize that we have those regulations in place to be able to meet to adequately develop, but I don't feel like this would be a good project to move forward with because of those reasons.
Any other comments from council? Councilmember Tilton Burn.
I would just echo some of those sentiments. I think given the concerns around floodplain and the ability to provide municipal services to this particular piece of land, I'm not sure that rezoning it in this manner is something that I would necessarily support. And so just a little bit of context around how I plan to vote tonight.
Councilmember Hager.
So I would also like to echo what my fellow council members have said. So last time when we heard the first reading on this, I asked some questions of Mike relating to really if there were any policies in place that would prevent other landowners from kind of parceling up some of their land into acreages and then trying to move forward with rezoning, and we don't have anything in place at this particular point in time that would prevent something of a piecemeal type of development taking place. And so again, just looking at the different maps that were provided with respect to the floodplain and current zoning and also the future land use map, none of those just really support that, in addition to the potential policy precedent that we would be setting here.
Okay. Councilmember Specker.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the commissioners if there is any legal reason or any legal thinking about dividing of agricultural land. I thought in the state had a 35-acre limit or some.
I believe Bob could answer that better than we could.
The actual size of acreages is up to each county commission. When they pass the zoning ordinance, there is no statewide zoning on that. Brookings County happens to have a 35-acre. Minnehaha County has a 40-acre. And then they've also got a policy where they can put all 4 houses in the one corner in Minnehaha County. So it's county by county on how large. And since 1975, Brookings County has had the 35-acre rule per residence. And if it's a pre-platted, such as this one was done in 1975 when we had zoning, it's 1 house per platted lot per se. And here they was trying to add an additional lot to it, is why the county said you'd have to rezone it R1A in the joint if you want to build another house, because by all means, they could build a house on the left-hand side or west side up here, but not on the east side.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to follow up and clarify on that, the 35 acres applies to new construction. If there was a home on an existing, if there was an address that was there in, 50 years ago, then you can build on that spot if there was a home there previously.
The 50-year is the correct number. After the zoning ordinance specifically states anything before the 50-year mark is not a buildable lot anymore.
Okay,
So you are correct on the 50-year mark.
Yep.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions, comments? Please call the roll for the city council. Oh,
If I'm understanding correctly, then Mr. Bob Hill is saying that on that west acre, if they leave those 2 acres, that they can build a house on that lot?
Well, I'd have to look at the records to make sure there was a house there in the past.
There was, and it was removed when, Donna? In the 90s. So that would be in that 50-year mark, if I'm understanding that correctly?
You could, yeah, come down to the office and
So just, I'm confused by that, just for clarity. So if it was the other acre, they could build there, but not on this one?
typically, if there's a lot in Brookings County that has platted before 1975, it is allowed to have a residence on it, especially if there was a residence on it before, and if they've got evidence that there was a residence on it before,
Yep.
and as long as it hasn't been removed more than 50 years, then yes.
Which,
In this case, they're trying to rezone is why we're even, as far as I can tell, we're even discussing this matter. At no point was it brought to our attention that he wanted to build on the west side. They always wanted to subdivide the land, and this is what brought it here as an R1A request.
yeah. Well, this is the point that's confusing for me, that I'm trying to understand here, is that if he just simply moves the house 100 feet, he can build there, but you don't want to allow him to build there. I'm confused by how that works,
Well, it's the footprint on where the house was in the past.
okay?
If-
So
and
if he would just simply flip that, he can build there.
Where the old house was. None that I could tell.
so regardless of what we do here, that will not affect him if he decides to build in the other part, right, Bob?
That's correct, because it's an agricultural property, and we would apply our agricultural zoning ordinance to it per the joint jurisdiction ordinance.
All right. Councilmember Avery.
Well, if we go down that route, then we need to defeat the zoning request and then have it just go back to the county and have them do what they will with it, I guess, because we don't want to zone it
Right.
R1A then. Then it's just an ag zoning in the county.
So I guess we're pretty much done discussing this. Please call the roll.
Doran,
No.
Niemeyer,
No.
Hager,
No.
Specker. No. Tilton Burn,
The county clerk, please call the roll.
Wendell,
No.
Avery,
No.
Post? Yes. Vanderwall?
No.
Hostler?
No.
Miller?
Yes.
Jensen?
No.
All right. Fails, we move on. So that entertain a motion from the city council to adjourn the joint city council and county commission meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Larry?
I ask for a motion to adjourn for the county side.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second.
All those in favor say aye in the city council.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
All in favor of the county side, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
This portion of the meeting is adjourned. So we'll reorganize the dais here and then we'll get on to the next meeting. Going with the regular meeting. Consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that need to be removed?
Mr. Mayor, we need to do the open forum first.
You're right. It's on the bottom of the last page. Is there any member of the public that wishes to address the council on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? Okay, now we'll move on to consent agenda. Are there any items to be removed from consent agenda? Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Is there any public comment on any of the items on our consent agenda? Council questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tiltonburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Doran.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Presentations and reports. I have a proclamation. I invite Kristen Zimmerman and the Park and Rec Board members that are here and department staff. Okay. Mayoral proclamation. Whereas Parks and Recreation promotes health and wellness, improving physical and mental health of people who live near parks, and whereas Parks and Recreation promotes time spent in nature, which impacts mental health by increasing cognitive performance and alleviating illnesses such as depression, attention deficit disorders, and Alzheimer's. And whereas Parks and Rec encourages physical activities by providing space for activities designed to promote active lifestyles, and whereas Parks and Recreation increases economic prosperity through increased property values, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas parks and natural recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. Whereas Brookings recognizes the benefits derived from parks and recreation resources, now therefore it be resolved that I, Opke Garrett Niemeyer, Mayor of City of Brookings, do hereby proclaim July as Parks and Recreation Month.
On behalf of the Park Board, and we just want to thank the mayor and the city for recognizing the importance of everything that the Parks and Recs Department and the city's parks provide to our citizens. So thank you.
I'd like to make a few comments about the Park and Rec Department and the work that they do. You know, we got 3 times the amount of parks that normal cities usually have, and I have to have hats off to Kristen and her staff for taking care of 3 times as much of property for Parks and Rec than other cities have to take care of with a third of the staff usually other cities have. Hats off to the Park and Rec Board and also Park and Rec staff. Thank you. Okay, Utility Board did not meet yet, from my understand, and so do we have a report from Brookings Health System? Councilmember Hager.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. So I attended the Monday, June 20th Board of Trustees meeting, and so there are a few highlights that I'll go through here. The first thing that we did was we received a presentation from Steve Timmerman, the Director of Pharmacy, about the pharmacy services at the hospital. So we talked about a variety of different quality initiatives to ensure patients understand their medications and that patients are actually receiving the correct medications when they are in the hospital, and then some of the issues relating to inventory. There was a strategic plan update that primarily focused on a couple of employee surveys. One was just about employee satisfaction with their workplace, and another one related to their childcare needs. Overall, the hospital feels like they're doing well in terms of improving their employee satisfaction. There were some highlights from the executive and board committee reports. One was that they focused a lot on the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill, the foundation's fundraiser, and then the presence of measles, or really actually the lack thereof. So as far as measles, there's been no reported cases as of Monday, June 20th in Brookings, despite those outbreaks nationwide. There are some concerns about rising healthcare costs and fewer reimbursements following the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, but there are exploring some options to try to ensure that there are reimbursements that are taking place. And then they realize that this is going to impact rural hospitals more so than them because they feel like they can more better weather the storm. Other than that, they are holding a fundraiser through the foundation, the 16th annual Aiming to Inspire Health fundraiser. So that will be on August 7th from 3 to 8 p.m. They're just trying to get the word out. So there will be a 50-round sporting clays course, some outdoor games and activities, a catered meal, and some raffle prizes. So their big grand prize is a UTV.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions or comments from council? All right, we'll move on to item 9. Item 9A, action on resolution 25-064, a resolution awarding bids on 2025-01 SWR sidewalk maintenance project. Charlie Richter, our city engineer, will present this item.
Good evening, council. As your city engineer, I'm here tonight requesting approval of resolution 25-064 for the award of project 2025-01 SWR sidewalk maintenance project. This project is a part of the annual inspection program and entails replacement of trip hazard sidewalks throughout the city. Once completed, a portion of this work will be assessed back to homeowners. Bids for this project were opened on June 17th, where we received 4 bids. The lowest bidder is Brock Contracting from Sioux Falls with a low bid of $52,738.75. This represents a 53%. This is 53% lower than the engineer's estimate. This price represents a significant savings to homeowners from last year's project. There was $185,000 budgeted in the CIP in the Special Assessment Fund for this contract. Public Works recommends that Brock Contracting be awarded the contract for this project.
Thank you, Charlie. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Council have any questions, comments? Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. Charlie, I was just wondering, as you noted in the memo that the estimate was based off of last year's bids and last year's price, I was just wondering, since it is half or over half, are materials getting cheaper, or was it a new contractor, or do you know a reason of why there's such a significant savings this time?
What we've been seeing is that contractors are more hungry for work. And we've seen, this is a new contractor that we haven't worked with before from Sioux Falls. So I think that they are eager just to get some work in and get this project under their belt. So,
Sure. Thank you.
Any comments, questions? Please call the roll.
Hager.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tiltonburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Doran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye. Thank you, Charlie. Item 10A, introduction and this is first readings. Item 10A, introduction and first reading on ordinance 25-022, an ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Brookings and pertaining to the authority and duties of the Brookings Human Rights Commission. Casey Bell, our Human Resources Director, and Human Rights Commission staff liaison will present this item.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. So I also serve as a staff liaison to the Brookings Human Rights Commission, and tonight we bring to you a revision of their ordinance which will update the authority of the commission. Before we get into that presentation, I'd like to invite some of the HRC commissioners, current Commissioner Carla Gatsky and former Commissioner Lawrence Novotny. Both of them have been instrumental in revising this ordinance and going through this process with us. So I'd like it's going to be kind of a group presentation to review this. And as a group, we'll give you an overview of what the current ordinance is, some important background information, the challenges the HRC faces with the current ordinance, the steps and research we took in developing a revised ordinance, and we'll end with the updated ordinance and how we believe it will better serve the HRC and the community. So maybe I'll turn it over to Lawrence to go first.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and council members. Okay, when the Brookings Human Rights Committee was first established back in the 70s, it was a committee established at that time. The committee was given permission by the ordinance to investigate discrimination complaints. A citizen could bring a complaint before the committee, and the committee could determine if discrimination occurred or not, and the committee could make a recommendation. But the committee had no power to enforce any of those decisions. So that's what was at that particular time. In order to achieve a more 100 MEI, the Municipal Equality Index score that is provided by the Human Rights Campaign, back in 2016, the City Council at that time made the Human Rights Committee a commission. And along with making that a commission and changing that ordinance, they also gave the new commission authority to investigate, arbitrate, and enforce discrimination complaints. Working along with the city attorney, the new commission adopted procedures that were mainly modified modified from what Sioux Falls was doing as to how to handle and resolve discrimination complaints. Between 2018 and now, one complaint was completely processed. I believe that it cost the city around $1,000 to hire a retired judge to mediate and resolve that issue. All of the commission members that adopted existing ordinance complaint process are no longer on the HRC. The current HRC members have found significant concerns and challenges in dealing with the complaint process, and some of these are: one is time. The commission is a volunteer board, and they have limited time to really try to delve into all of these issues. Another, of course, is funding. As I mentioned before, it costs the city around $1,000 for that one complaint process, and if we stay with that, we don't know how much, when future complaints come in, what that would wind up being costing. It is not factored into the budget for the HRC. Another one is formalized training and turnover. Attempts to educate and train new commission members as they come on board kind of take some time to run them through the procedure. And also there's turnover on the existing commission. So at least every year there's a new commission or two commission members which have to then go through the training process. Another thing is the issue of confidentiality. The commissioners expressed concern with confidentiality needed to handle these sensitive matters and how this is amplified in public meetings. Because in the current complaint process, the final resolution is to come before the Human Rights Commission in a public forum. And of course, then there won't be any confidentiality. The other is liability and incorrect determinations. Commissioners voiced strong concerns about potential personal and municipal liability associated with adjudicating complaints. They emphasized that the risk is heightened by the limited understanding of proper complaint handling procedures, which could lead to inaccurate or unjust determinations. And because of these concerns, the Commission is hesitant to advertise the complaint process to the community, because we are worried about overpromising something and then under-delivering what supposedly we have promised. Now I'll turn it over to Carter for the next process.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you all for taking time to hear about the work that the Commission has been doing in this area. For more than 3 years, the commission has had a working group to really try to address the issues that Lawrence was outlining. We started with multiple conversations with our city attorney to try to understand the history better and the purpose and possibilities of how we could move forward. We met with other city staff to learn about resources from the legal office, from the police force, from the court staff. We met with the South Dakota Human Rights Division at the state level to understand what might be possible from their perspective. We researched other regional communities. We identified that the Sioux Falls ordinance in this area is exactly the same as the Brookings ordinance. And so we contacted the Sioux Falls Human Relations Commission, and they have a dedicated legal office to support them. And we had a couple conversations with them to understand the effort that they put forward to handle the complaints that they get as a result of their ordinance. They have a staff of, I think, 5 to focus on that. We talked to them about could they help us, and that's not really within their purview. We did identify a city in Iowa, Cedar Falls, that had an ordinance very similar to ours, and that went through a transition process that we're proposing that would remove that form of the ordinance and put in an ordinance that would really instruct the Human Rights Commission to really focus on outreach and advocacy and education. So thank you.
Okay.
I'll round out the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So what we're proposing for the revised ordinance would essentially remove the HRC's ability or authority to investigate, arbitrate, and enforce complaints of discrimination. Instead, the commission would serve as a knowledgeable and accessible resource for individuals seeking help. We do this by guiding residents to appropriate places that are better equipped to handle formal complaints of discrimination. So, for example, if a citizen is experiencing employment discrimination, we would help connect them with resources at the EEOC, or the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, which is a federal agency that would help that individual with that type of complaint. With the revision of the ordinance, this would help the HRC focus their time and energy on providing education and outreach, like Carla had noted earlier, and we feel that this is something that we're confident in our ability to do. We'd also plan to have more public-facing resources and support on the city website that would include an option for residents to still submit a concern rather than a complaint. And then when they submit that concern, a member of the HRC would get in contact with that individual and then help get them to the appropriate resource. They could also come inside the city building if they'd like to. They could mail it in. We'd have multiple options for them to get in contact with us. We do feel that piece of it is still important, so we can keep track of the various types of discrimination that might be happening in the Brookings community for a couple of reasons. One, it could help us identify trends. It could help kind of target our area of focus and for education and outreach, and it could help with drafting reports back to council as well. So the revised ordinance itself is supported by legal. We had multiple conversations with then City Attorney Steve Breitzman, and he was engaged throughout the entire process, and it's received unanimous support from the Human Rights Commission. That's it. We'll stand for any questions, though.
Thank you, Casey. Questions, comments this evening? Councilmember Tilton Burn.
Thank you all for bringing this proposed change to us. I have just a couple of questions. My first question, Lawrence, I believe you had mentioned that this was sort of implemented in order to help us achieve the 100 score in the MEI index. Will changing this piece of the commission's responsibilities impact that score?
Yeah, probably will affect it by about 2 points, because I think right now we awarded 2 points for having an enforcement complaint process in place. Go ahead.
Do you happen to remember what our most recent score was? I believe we were
well, we are at 100. The maximum points allowed are 100, but there's bonus points, and we had probably about up to, I think, about around 104 this last time for some bonus points, but they always cut it off at 100.
Sure. So it wouldn't impact our overall score. We'd still get
It should not. There's some other areas we could try to look at to see if we can pick up some other points in some other processes. As these scores come out, sometimes they change scoring categories. So we'd have to look at what they're going to score us on this year and see if we can come up with some other ways to make that up.
Great. I definitely appreciate that a volunteer commission may not have the capacity or resources to go through a process where you're investigating complaints and enforcing them, but I do think the ability to file those complaints is still very important. It sounds like from the presentation that folks would still be able to bring those complaints forward to the Human Rights Commission, that those complaints will still be tracked by the commission as a useful data point, but rather than doing the actual investigation and enforcement, the commission would be able to then kind of advise folks on who to contact to go through that process. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that is the plan.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I think it's very important to make sure we still have useful resources so that folks that are experiencing any type of discrimination can go to a trusted resource like the commission to ask for that help. So I'm glad to hear that that will continue to be a piece of the work done by the commission. Also definitely understand that this is a heavy lift to enforce these kinds of things, and so appreciate the diligence that the group has gone through to identify ways you can still support individuals that are going through those concerns, but also maybe alleviate some of the burden that's on a volunteer group.
All right. Any other comments, questions from council? Councilmember Wendell?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I just want to preface my questions by saying I'm fully supportive of your recommendation and want to thank you for the work you've done to be really thoughtful in your approach to bringing this recommendation forward. A question that I have that perhaps isn't for any of the three of you and maybe isn't one we have a firm grasp on tonight is whether or not we have clear definitions of what constitutes a board, a committee, or a commission. As I look through some of our ordinances, I don't find that language. And I seem to remember very early on in my time on the council, perhaps even when we were considering shifting the Human Rights Committee to a Human Rights Commission, we discussed what constituted a commission versus a committee. And sort of in the spirit of this conversation, at some point it might be helpful for us just to, because we have some boards and we have some committees and we have some commissions, that we understand why we designate certain bodies with certain titles.
Yeah, we could certainly provide that in the future. Just to summarize it, Steve Breitzman did provide us a memo here about a year or two ago on the differences. There really is no difference. The City Council can name it whatever they want. But in this specific difference, the Human Rights Commission, I believe there's some state law surrounding Human Rights Commission, and therefore that's why the city decided to call it the commission. But regardless, it's really in the language that you use as City Council when you create these committees, commissions, and the power or the authority you give them. But I could certainly provide that memo to you as council, or give you an update publicly as well, if there's people that have interest in that.
Okay, Councilmember Duren?
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I would also like to preface that I have a few questions in complete support of this new system. I know it took extensive research and effort from the commission, so I really do appreciate all of your work around this. With the new system, so it sounds like if someone does have a concern, there would be kind of similar to an intake process. I was just wondering, since you had discussed concerns around training and confidentiality guardrails, when you do an intake, you'll still have to have some sort of supportive listening training as well as maintaining that confidentiality. I was wondering if you could overview your plan with who would be the contact on the commission. Would it be like one consistent position on the commission to receive that training, or what would that look like once an intake is processed?
So we don't have that 100% formalized. However, what we're thinking is the complaint itself would actually come to the Human Resources Office and to the staff liaison, who then could be able to share it with the commissioners. We'd probably target a working group, those that are well-equipped and well-knowledged on this specific piece that the HRC would do, to help get in contact with that individual to get them appropriate resources. And I think that would help with some of the turnover challenges that we might experience. I can tell you since I've been the staff liaison to the HRC, we've ran into multiple HRC members that have expressed concern with this specific piece that is kind of push them away from the commission or shorten their time on the commission. So I think we'd find some dedicated individuals. More than likely, we'd continue with this working group that we have or look to expand it potentially in the future, have the concern come to the Human Resources Office, and then bring that to the appropriate working groups on the HRC, and then target an individual on the HRC that would reach out to that community member that is expressing concern, right? And then help follow through with them.
Sure. And then would that be just a one-time referral, or would you have any other follow-up, and not necessarily case management, but knowing the outcome or the processing or any other check-ins, or is it just a one-time referral?
My guess is it's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis. Through our experience, we found that some individuals want to just submit a concern and then have a listening ear, right? And that's kind of the extent that they want with it. And some might appreciate more of a second touch approach where, hey, we give them the resources and then we follow up and say, hey, did you get a chance to contact them? How did it go? What was your experience? And I think that would be important for the commission to understand too, especially since we're kind of helping shepherd them to these resources. So.
Sure. A couple more questions. Yeah. So one, I just wanted to make sure first that a resource that is listed, because I couldn't remember with the discussions that we've had previously if this was included. Do we include the 211 Helpline Center phone number and website to go direct anyone to a database for additional resources if they're looking?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's a great resource, so we probably should.
Okay, good. And with that, I was just thinking about how they update their resources annually. So I was wondering if you have considered a process of maintaining the resources that are listed on this static web page to make sure that they are up to date and that it is the correct places that residents should look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. That's something that we've discussed lightly, but I know as part of a working group, they'll have multiple things that they'd follow through on, right? Beyond just, receiving the concern and then following up on it. It would also be updating these resources on an annual basis, making sure they're good, or we just develop that time frame to do those spot checks and make sure that they're still accurate. Obviously, we don't want to be publicizing outdated information because nothing's more frustrating than when you click on a link and it brings you to somewhere that doesn't even exist. So.
Sure, perfect. And then my last question is, so you had mentioned that the reports would help track trends, which was actually one of my questions, was if you had any mechanisms in place for tracking like referrals, community education efforts, or issue trends. Would that just be based off of the submitted concerns, or is there a way potentially with our staff to track clicked links on the website to see what issues are being tracked if they're not submitting a concern specifically with you?
That's another great point that we hadn't considered, but it's definitely something that we should discuss. And I'm sure Sherry and the PIO team, they'd be able to help equip us with that information to see if we can look at the number of clicks on maybe specific links. That could help kind of formulate our approach for education and outreach too. So that's a really good point.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the work that the commission has done on this. I know that it has taken years and extensive research and communication. So thank you so much for being honest with each other and acknowledging that there were a lot of barriers that the commission was facing and that we needed to figure out a better solution. And I'm excited for this process to move forward.
All right. Any other questions from council? Questions? Comments? All right. Thank you, Casey. Also, Lawrence and Carla for your information this evening. Second reading will be on the 22nd of July. Item 11, second readings and public hearings. Second reading and action on ordinance 25-021, an ordinance authorizing budget amendment number 4 to the 2025 budget. Ashley Wrench, our finance director, will present this item.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This is the second reading of ordinance 25-021, authorizing amendment number 4 to the 2025 budget. This amendment increases the general fund expenditure budget by $2.25 million to support infrastructure and detention pond improvements associated with the marketplace development. Section 8 of the development agreement for TIF number 13 authorizes a grant in this amount to be paid to Ryan Companies, the developer, for these improvements. This agreement was adopted on November 12th, 2024. Independent from the 2025 budget process, and the proper budget authority must be granted in order to disperse the funds. Staff recommends approval of this ordinance as presented, and with that, I'll stand by for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and second. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing any council questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Specker.
Aye.
Tildenburn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Doran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
All right. Item 11B, public hearing and action on ordinance 25-015, an ordinance amending zoning ordinance pertaining to concrete, asphalt, and rock crushing facility for the purposes of administration of the zoning ordinance. Mike Struck, our development director, will present this item.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. The ordinance before you tonight, 25-015, is an amendment to our zoning ordinance to introduce a new use into the zoning ordinance. We're proposing to add the use of concrete, asphalt, and rock crushing facilities as an allowable conditional use, looking at 3 particular zoning districts: the Ag District, the I-1, and the I-2 district. The primary reasons we selected those districts: similarity in the types of uses that are occurring or the types of facilities that are constructed in those particular zoning districts, as well as, generally speaking, in the Ag and I-1 and I-2 districts, you're dealing with larger lot areas, so it provides the appropriate space for these types of facilities to occur. We do provide a definition of there. It does provide some exceptions. So a crushing facility would not be associated with, some of the street projects that we do when we concrete, when you have to break them up, or even our mill and overlays. Likewise, if they're doing a demolition of a structure, that would not be considered like a crushing type operation. As a conditional use, there are a number of standards that would be applied. I'll quickly run through a few of those. What we're proposing is that there would be a buffer distance or setback from the crushing facility itself, a minimum distance of 300 feet to any non-ag or non-industrial zone property. So essentially saying is, if we proceed forward and allowing it in the ag, the I-1 and the I-2, if you're adjacent to those types of zoning districts, the 300-foot buffer would not apply because you're located adjacent to like type uses. If it's any other zoning district, whether it be a residential or a commercial, civic, floodway, whatever it may be, then that 300-foot buffer would apply. It's from the facility itself, the operation, 300 feet to that particular district boundary line of the non-ag or non-industrial zone property. A couple others would be the crushing operation itself would need to be a minimum of 100 feet from the property line or right-of-way line, just to primarily make sure that you're not creating any potential sight line issues, and to try and minimize the amount of material that could be airlifted across the site. Hours of operation identified. We have 2 different sets of hours of operation, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday for those that are abutting an ag or industrial zone property. If you're abutting anything other than those ag or industrial, hours would be limited to 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. The use would need to be conducted, operated, and maintained in accordance with any necessary local, state, and federal permits, copies of which they would need to provide to the Community Development Office to keep on file. And then the last provision in there on some of the standards would be, and this is required of any conditional use, a site plan drawn to scale showing the location of all buildings, areas of outdoor processes and storage, fence, walls, landscaping, screening, vegetation, and location of any bodies of water. One that may be a little bit new is a dust management plan, describing the dust emissions, sources, their quantity and composition, indicating conformance with all applicable air quality regulations, and then a drainage plan for any stormwater management and runoff. And then the last item would be a traffic plan describing the number of trucks or vehicle trips the proposed project would generate and their principal access routes. This does come to you with unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission for approval, and the Development Review Team reviewed this and supports the request. And with that, I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
I open the public hearing on this item. Is there any public comment? Council have any questions, comments? Councilmember Specker.
Yes, Mike, I'd like to thank you and your office for working on this. I mean, there are significant health effects associated with silica exposure, which you get from concrete crushing. And I think keeping it away from residential, putting in that buffer zone and having the dust control is extremely helpful for within the city limits. And I appreciate you working on it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, I had a question. From the last meeting, I thought I remember you saying that there is currently a facility, but with with the passage potentially of this, it would have to move with a different buffer. Is that correct? Did I remember that correct?
So there was an operation, the crushing facility itself, the crushing operation is moved. The remnants still exist, but they've been slowly moving them out. If they would have picked a better location on site, they could have done it on the piece of property they were on. They just, for whatever reason, picked a location right next to residential uses, and they could have moved further to the interior. By doing such, it also gives you the ability to, if it's a long-term solution or business operation, they'd have the ability to do some tree plantings to try and help break up some of those winds. I think that particular location that really kind of stirred us looking at this is really temporary in nature. I think they're planning to move out of that area. They're looking at different areas, but there are some other locations within the Brookings area that are looking at this as maybe a longer term solution or component of their overall business plan. It's maybe not their primary component, but they do it already on existing sites. So I think having some of these regulations in place can help protect themselves as well as the public from kind of the quote unquote unintended consequences.
Sure. Okay. That was going to be my follow-up question, is if they're typically short-term, temporary, or long-term permanent facilities. So that answered that. Thank you. I would also like to just reiterate my appreciation to you and the staff to create a new use that balances industrial flexibility and environmental stewardship. I really appreciate the efforts that you've done on this. And I also want to extend my appreciation to the public that raised this concern to City Council. We do really appreciate when community members ask questions or raise concerns, and we're able to address it in whatever that manner looks like.
As a point of clarification, I should probably note that these crushing facilities are very mobile, and so they may establish a use on a site, and typically what happens is they'll stockpile materials until it's quote unquote economically feasible to bring the crusher on site. They will crush the material on site and they'll create stockpiles, and then when the material's gone, they'll move to a different location, could be a different community, different county or whatnot, but they kind of come in cycles, and they'll maybe kind of hit the Brookings area a couple of times a year to try and, so they're not going to necessarily be in the same location every time, but it is a great sustainable use of concrete that has seen its extended life in its current project by crushing it and recycling it into makes great base course material. But just as a clarity, those crushing facilities could move around on the site, but they'll just have to make sure they maintain those buffers appropriately.
Sure. Thank you for that clarification. Oh, I actually thought of one more question too. Okay, so since you had talked about how the dust management plan, that's something that is newer, I'm not as familiar with, are the guidelines that are currently in place by other levels of government and organizations, would you say those are adequate, or is that something that potentially staff or city council would need to review?
I'm not an expert in this particular field. We looked at the regulations, the air quality standards that are in place, what currently goes. I did talk with an operator that this is a component of their business plan. They have sensors on the equipment that when the dust particles get to a certain level, they just have to connect to a water source, and then they can spray the materials as it's going through the, I believe it's kind of the crushing conveyor portion of it. Surprisingly is, and it's, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt, is the one that kind of stirred all of this issue. When the state came out and did their actual inspection, they were in compliance. The challenge is it's one point in time, and we know in South Dakota the conditions change kind of by the minute. And so, you know, there's a number of factors that come in play. So there's a lot of responsibility on the operators themselves to make sure that they are maintaining those appropriate air quality standards. You know, at this particular point in time, we'd have to rely upon the state with those standards. We don't have the personnel or the equipment at this time.
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, any other council questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Tilton Burn.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Doran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move on to 11C, public hearing and action on ordinance 25-1014, an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Brookings pertaining to the expiration of a conditional use permit for the purpose of administration of the zoning ordinance. Mike Struck will present this item also.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Ordinance 25-014 is an ordinance that is proposing a change to the expiration date with the conditional use permit. The current language is 1 year. Staff is proposing to change that to 2 years. I need to give a little bit of a background as it'll lead into the request from last council meeting. Brookings is maybe a little bit unique in how we approve conditional uses, as we approve them by ordinance. Some places also do it by ordinance, but I found it's more common they either do it by a resolution or just a simple voice majority vote. And the reason I bring this up is because if you recall at the last meeting, there was a request to bring back an option where we'd keep the 1 year, but there would be the ability for the council to evaluate or consider an extension. That would be an amendment to the original ordinance approving the conditional use permit. So essentially is we'd have to go back and amend the ordinance approving the conditional use permit, which would basically mean we'd be doing the same process as currently in place. That they'd have to go through the Planning Commission, a first and a second reading, because it would be a change to the ordinance itself. If that is kind of the route you're leaning, I would suggest we just withdraw the entire proposed amendment and leave the language alone as just a 1 year, because it doesn't change the time process. It doesn't save any time. It's the same process. And then rather than asking for an extension, just come back and ask for a conditional use permit all over again. So I don't know if that helps clarify, but that is the option 2 that was presented. That language was language very similar to how our Board of Adjustment operates, but the Board of Adjustment is different, is that it requires a 2/3 majority vote, and it's not done by an ordinance or resolution. So they have that ability. In that case, variances have a 3-year expiration date, and if the variance hasn't been used or work began, they can come back and ask for an extension. I would say in my tenure, it's happened a couple of times, but the Board of Adjustment certainly takes advantage of the opportunity to give the applicant a hard time for why the variance was so important to get granted right away, and then you couldn't make it work in 3 years, but sometimes things happen. Just like sometimes in the conditional use process, they have great intentions with the 1 year time frame, but sometimes you want that level of confidence that you got the appropriate approvals before you get too far down the road expending funds on design or infrastructure work and then get into the building plans and such. And sometimes that 1 year time frame can go by pretty quickly. That's kind of what led to the proposal. We reviewed some peer communities. We kind of found all over the range from anywhere from 1 to 3 years. We felt the compromise was 2 years, and that's kind of why we presented the 2-year expiration date. With that, I'd stand for any questions you have. This does come as a unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission. The Development Review Team supported the request, and I'd be available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. With that being said, is there a motion to approve, and are that motion going to be proposed for the 2-year option or option 2? Entertain a motion to approve.
I would move to approve the initial 2-year option that was proposed during the first reading.
Second.
All right, public discussion on this item? Comments from council? Questions? Councilmember Tilton Burn.
Thank you very much for the explanation as to why we're looking at maybe one option rather than truly looking at 2 different options. I think that makes a lot of sense, so thank you for that. Can you remind us what constitutes significant work? Is simply doing dirt work on the property enough, or does it have to be more than that?
We typically look at it as pulling a building permit and starting work on the actual structure itself. Because the conditional use is generally associated with some sort of a building or a use within the building. So we want to see work proceeding on the actual structure itself. Understanding that a lot of times you need to do the exterior site improvements to even lead up to the building permit, but it's somewhat the chicken and the egg. Do you get started with all those improvements with the unknown of whether or not my conditional use will get approved? We feel that within a 2-year time frame, that should provide ample opportunity to get started on the work.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Councilmember Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, I have a few questions. So one is, let's say looking at the other side, if we didn't move forward with 2 years, what is the typical cost or timeline of a developer who has to go through, like if something happened in the first year and they have to go through this entire process again, what does that look like for the developer?
Typically, the cheap, or I guess the cheap part of it is applying for the permits. I mean, I think our permitting fee is like $250. It's more the time process on their end from having to halt construction, delaying construction. I will tell you, a lot of times they kind of get caught off guard with the expiration time frame, and staff bring it up to them. So now all of a sudden you're delaying your contractors from being able to start, your subcontractors and such. And it's a whole scheduling thing. And can you get those subcontractors to come back and fall in line? And it's probably more timing that's more valuable to them than anything. I don't know if there's as much significant, I mean, obviously there's a financial component of it, but it's really the timing that really dictates everything.
Sure, that makes sense. Because I'm asking that because I think one concern I have with this is that we have the 1-year timeline right now because we want to encourage quick growth and development, right? And we understand that South Dakota weather happens and things happen. That's why we're looking at the 2-year. In your experience, would you be able to provide some testimony of, could you see that could be an unintended consequence of if we open it up to 2 years that it does slow growth, or do you think it simply just provides that flexibility for the developers?
I would say more times than not, it provides the flexibility. Typically, when they get a particular point in time, they typically find out after the fact that they need a conditional use, and so it's holding their project up. You'd like to think they're thinking longer term and getting out in front of some of these items, but generally speaking, when it comes to conditional uses, it's usually kind of an aha moment when they get to the actual, they're submitting for like a building permit, and it's like, well, wait a minute, this isn't a use that would be allowed by right. It's a conditional use. Here's the process. Typical conditional use process, we tell them you have to plan for at least 3 months from start to finish. So I wouldn't say that it's going to slow down development. I think it's going to provide them the flexibility, to have at least get through that process and have the confidence to move forward with their projects.
I think I agree with you, so thank you for providing that testimony.
All right. Any other comments, questions? Please call the roll.
Wendell.
Aye.
Avery.
Aye.
Doran.
Aye.
Niemeyer.
Aye.
Hager.
Aye.
Specker.
Aye.
Tilton Burden.
Aye.
Okay, that concludes the business that we have this evening. Next meeting will be the 22nd of July. We do have a proclamation from McCory Gardens' 60th anniversary. One change order or contract award for skate park renovations. We have 5 first readings, currently no second reading. Well, we do have 1 second reading. And then no other business at the moment. Is there any other topics that the council would like to discuss in the future? That being said, we are going to go into executive session. There will not be any business or decisions made afterwards. And we are going down the second floor to Suite 230 to do this meeting in room 241. Executive session pursuant to South Dakota CL 1-25-2.3 for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters. And SDCL 1-25-2.5 for the purpose of discussing marketing or pricing strategies by a board or commission of a business owned by the state or any of its political subdivisions when public discussion may be harmful to the competitive position of the business. I entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are in executive session.